In the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, when a character reached level 9, one of their class abilities allowed them to build a stronghold and attract followers. An introductory version of strongholds and followers called Bastions and Warbands is now coming to Shadowdark. We're going to look at it today, along with the history of this style of gameplay. Welcome, I'm John. I'm a longtime referee. Here on my channel, I talk about old-time Dungeons & Dragons and Shadowdark, a modern game, but it captures the spirit of 1980s D&D. Thanks for being here. Moving from adventure to conquer, and perhaps even a king, had always been an important part of D&D's DNA. It has strong roots in sword and sorcery, literature, and film. Who doesn't love the Conan the Barbarian movie from like 1980, where they say, and on this day, Conan was destined to wear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. I know when we used to play, we always aspired to getting our characters up to 9th level and to be able to build strongholds. And I don't know, for some reason, 30 years ago, Wizards of the Coast just kind of dropped that from the game. Shadowdark, which features OSR-style gameplay but is derived from 5e, was not going to support this gameplay, but no longer. Bastions and Warbands are in playtest mode, and they'll be in the Western Reaches books when they release, so let's take a look at them. Here's an overview of the Bastion rules. They're very simple. In fact, I would say they're so simple they can be bolted on to pretty much any campaign. They're about the level of maybe getting a house in Skyrim, where now you've got a place to put your gear. You can add a few upgrades to it to personalize it and bling it out. There's 4 simple choices of a dwelling type, from a modest house all the way up to a castle. And then depending on the size, you get to add upgrades to it. You can either build it or repair an existing one. They have hit points, so they can be damaged in a siege. There's not a whole lot of detail on what can damage strongholds yet. Maybe that'll be left to the referee. And then there's a rudimentary system of hazards where several times a year something could happen and you might need to defend your stronghold or deal with some kind of worldly event. Personally, I think we could probably use an extra page covering domains, like talking about what damages them, what kind of weapons, and maybe siege weapons and things like that, as well as if a player establishes a castle or something out there on the frontier, is there population, is there growth, do they collect any money, things like that. But for a start, these are simple and they could be added to, like I said, pretty much any campaign. The next thing we're going to look at are the Warband rules. They're very simple. Conceptually, they work a lot like swarms in earlier editions, where you take an individual monster and then say, all right, we're going to clump a whole bunch of them together and then just build a new stat block that represents this amorphous blob. Warband represents up to 20 individuals of a type. There's a little algorithm on the page on how you beef it up. There's some rules on how to recruit them, give them stats. You can have a certain number of upgrades amongst all your different warbands. They do a lot of damage. That's the big difference. They do triple damage from a normal monster. And then morale and routing rules have been added as well. The one thing I'll call out, depending on your character type, you can only have a certain number of warbands working for you. So fighters can have up to 6. So that means that their army is capped, at least by my reading, at 120 individuals. Magic users on the low end could only have 2 warbands. And then there's some coarse-grained maintenance costs. Here on the second page, there's some notes on upgrades. Again, your warbands could have a special ability that differentiates them. And then there's a whole bunch of sample warband types here. Now for me, I'm actually working on a scenario for a convention coming up in January. And so I had an opportunity to play around with the warband rules. Here's the scenario. So there's this gigantic cavern, multiple levels. It is part of a mega dungeon. It's this huge mushroom canyon divided by a chasm. And in the north end, is they're the mounds of Morlocks. And at the far south end, the friendly cave people. And every, 10 or 15 years or so, the Lords of the Morlocks, which are these ancient vampires called the Bloodless Lords, arise out of the well of sacrifice on the fractious night and command the Morlocks to pour across the chasm like locusts or soldier ants or something and carry off as many of the cavemen as they can. Of course, that's going to be when the players happen to be in the cavern exploring. So there's a chance that the player characters in this scenario could be there when the fractious night happens. I wanted to try out the Warband rules and just see how they worked. So here's a simple stat for the caveman up top, and then the Warband version. You basically double the level, maximize the hit points, triple the damage, and away you go. I did the same thing to the Morlocks. Very simple. It's a very, very simple stat block. Right, and then here's the nerdy thing. I actually built a spreadsheet with random number generators in there and modeled probably, I want to say, 6 to 8 different combats. The cavemen have a stockade fort, so they're going to have like little wooden towers where they can throw rocks down on opponents, and they've got a gate. It's like a palisade. And then the Morlocks are attacking uphill, and they've got to scale the walls. So the Morlocks were attacking with disadvantage. The cavemen had advantage. One set of scenarios, it was like 2 cavemen warbands against 4 Morlock warbands. And then the other scenario was 2 caveman warbands against 6. Or they say attackers need to have like a 3-to-1 advantage if someone's defending. So I just wanted to see how 6-to-2 worked out. What I can say, first off, the Warband rules work. They're really simple. When the odds were 4-2, the cavemen could win, but it would get stretched out to like 8 to 10 rounds of attrition. And when it was 6-2, the Morlocks wiped them out every time, probably around rounds 5 or 6, or somewhere between rounds 4 and 6. So what I learned was that, one, they work. They're simple. If player characters were present, they would make a huge difference. So the hero rules embedded with warbands. If a character's with a warband, it gives them advantage on morale, and failing a morale check and then breaking and withdrawing or routing is a huge risk with these rules. So player characters shore that up. They can add their charisma to the morale checks as well. So that makes a huge difference. The player characters are going to deal damage as well. So 6-2, it might even need to be 8-2. So that would be like 160 Morlocks against 40 cavemen, and then have player characters potentially make up the difference. The Morlocks probably need their own, quote, hero or boss monster, something like a cave troll that is going to assault the castle itself and try to rip down the gates and break the palisade or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to put these to immediate use. I was pretty happy with it. Some thoughts on these rules, though. So they're simple, easy, fun. Both the Bastion rules and the Warband rules are perfect for a convention game and casual players. And I don't mean this in an insulting way. They're definitely what I call like a beer and pretzels approach to adding these elements to your Shadowdark game. They don't exactly scale. If a fighter is limited at having 6 warbands and that's 120 people, it's not going to let you build a huge army that's going to let you conquer a kingdom, for instance. We'll need to dig into other rules for that. And I will say that there is a third-party war book for Shadowdark called Hellmarch that I'm aware of. It's on my radar. I just haven't got a chance to pick that one up and take a look at it. One of the things the Shadowdark rules made me think about is the history of Bastions and Warbands and mass combat in Dungeons and Dragons. And let's take a whirlwind tour. If you are new to the game since 5th edition, for instance, past 10 years, you may not even realize that the game has this rich history of supporting this style of gameplay. Back in AD&D time period, like the 1970s with the Player's Handbook, every character class had the ability when they got to 9th level to go and create a stronghold, they would automatically attract men-at-arms and followers, or like-minded characters. Like a wizard would attract apprentices, a thief would attract thieves, and if you were a fighter, you could take over a parcel of land, families would start to move in, you'd even get to raise taxes, which would help offset the costs of the castle and offset the costs of the military. This was before my time, but in the early 1970s, there was this set of mass combat rules and miniature rules called chainmail. So I wasn't a chainmail person. In the mid-1980s, AD&D came out with Battle System, which was miniatures combat for armies. I guess nowadays, like if you've ever seen Warhammer people at a convention where they've got these huge tables and they're pushing around like little groupings of miniatures and measuring stuff. Battle System, I think, played mostly like that. I owned it briefly, but I was not a miniatures guy in the 1980s. I was just a poor teenager who tabletop but didn't have a closet full of miniatures. So we didn't really get into Battle System all that much. All that would change with BECMI. BECMI stands for a Basic Expert Companion Master, all the way up to Immortals. And that was the evolution of basic Dungeons and Dragons all throughout the 80s. Like the red and blue boxes went on to become BECMI. And these rule books, the companion set and even the rule Cyclopedia, which collected almost everything in BECMI into a single volume, they took high-level gameplay and introduced domains, but really embellished it to encompass things like, I don't know, domain morale and growth over time and peasant families coming and going and interactions with other nobles, things like feasts and festivals and tournaments. And it really supported almost having like your own medieval kingdom where players as rulers was sort of a side activity that would carry on for many levels. BECMI was very ambitious and assumed you would be playing from levels 1 to level 36. It's a little sad. I'm always happy if a campaign lasts 2 years, let alone 20 years. But one thing BECMI had was very like simplistic but abstract rules for mass combat called the War Machine and the Siege Machine. Got a ton of use out of those. And the companion stuff was actually pretty well supported in terms of published adventure modules. One of them I'm showing here on the screen, Red Arrow, Black Shield, basically involved the characters in this world war where invaders from the west, like desert nomads, are invading all the eastern lands, and the kingdoms are all going to get overwhelmed unless they get a lot more participation from neighbors and alliances are formed. And so the player characters are doing two different things. They're controlling the armies of the East. Then they're also going on these diplomatic missions to all the countries of the known world, trying to convince them to either enter the war on the eastern side or don't join the desert nomads. It's a really cool campaign. And then the other one, Test of the Warlords, involved a recently discovered land up in the north full of monsters. It's been given to a king to go settle. He's looking for 15th level characters and above to come up there, establish a dominion, and be part of his vassals. And over the course of the campaign, you're being invaded by like giants and dragons, and eventually an entire empire tries to take away the land of Norwald from the new king. So really epic stuff that took advantage of both domains and mass combat. I was totally there for it. In the OSR era, so like in the last 10 to 15 years, really the only OSR game I can think of that really leaned into this style of play was ACKS, Adventure Conqueror King. And ACKS was definitely kind of a spiritual successor to the rule Cyclopedia. Instead of trying to cover levels 1 to 36, it said, all right, a reasonable campaign is going to be levels 1 to 14. The thing about ACKS that really set it apart is that it tried to square the entire economy. Like the whole game has these economic underpinnings where if you are a spreadsheet maven, you could model like an empire at the top level and then decompose it down to like even the smallest baronies and understand, okay, how much money do they generate? How much wealth do they get from peasant families and natural resources and things like that? ACKS goes very, very deep on the economics, trade routes and things. If you love spreadsheets and you want that level of almost simulation or solidity to your world building, it's a good one. To amuse myself, and mainly because I do this channel for fun and to amuse myself, I put all of these different systems on the Vince McMahon reaction scale. So depending on how important domains and mass combat and castles and strongholds are to you, that would indicate where on the Vince McMahon scale you'd fall. From up at the top, the beer and pretzels approach, which is the Shadowdark. I think it's like 6 pages Shadowdark has devoted to this now, versus the glory that is ACKS, which uses 243 pages to cover domains and economics and warfare. A lot of it's in an add-on book called Domains at War. Obviously, those guys take this really seriously. For me, I figure my players are mostly going to be happy at the Shadowdark beer and pretzels level. We've got some opportunities even in my current campaigns where they're going to be able to pick up a stronghold and start playing it out. I think it's going to be a fun little side game. That's a little light for me. I think I'm probably happier next level down with sort of the BECMI level of detail, adding domains and having a mass combat system that would support larger military struggles. We'll see. But that's it for today. Let me know in the comments where you land on the Vince scale. Are domains and castles and mass combat, rulership, any of that even important to you? Do you see it playing a part in your campaign's end game at some point? Me, I got to have it, although maybe not 240 pages worth of it. If you made it this far, thanks. You're awesome. Please consider subscribing, dropping a comment, liking this video, doing all that kind of stuff. It does help my channel, so thanks for being here, and I'll see everyone next time.